following episode most likely contains graphic language, details of violence, and murder, and may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 55 of Murder with My Mother, the true crime podcast where I talk murder with my mother.
Hello, everybody.
My mother, who, since the last episode, has gone abroad to Japan.
I did do that.
And also will be living her life abroad because she got fucking married to an American.
I also did that.
Yes.
So life has been eventful since the last time that we spoke to you guys.
It went from her never dating again to her never online dating again.
To having a shotgun wedding.
Well, hopefully you're not pregnant.
Surprise! Guess what? Just kidding.
I would just get pregnant too so we can relive our family.
Well, and then you would also keep my baby because I do not want another one.
So yeah, congratulations, Mom and William. I don't know if I'm allowed to say his name. People are going to target him now because they're...
It'll be fine.
I guess
all my many suitors.
Yes, that's what I mean. I guess there's probably a lot of Williams in the world, so try narrowing that motherfucker down.
Yeah, it was good. It was a little small intimate wedding with my close friends and some family. Unfortunately, his family, except for his daughters, couldn't make it, but we enjoyed the day. We got rip-roaring wasted, and
I got really sunburnt in my head.
Yeah, the weather was nice, and a good time was had by all.
It was hilarious when I did a toast to Mom and William and talked about how they were now more likely to murder each other, and the officiant.
Yeah.
So shout out to Shelly.
Shelly.
She actually recognized our voice after I had talked about murdering. And I was like, oh my God, I listened to your guys' podcast. So that was hilarious.
Yeah.
So yeah, but lots has happened in our lives, obviously that. And, they went to Japan, Mom and my son, and yeah, just been busy on all fronts, and especially in the true crime world. So hopping into our current events, if for everybody who keeps up with anything to do with Robert Piece of Shit Pickton, he was attacked by another inmate with a broom handle, and actually, I think the person who attacked him had shoved the splintered broom handle right up his nose into his brain. So talk about poetic justice. He was on life support for about a week, and on May 31st, he died.
And although, I don't think it could have happened. It couldn't have happened to a more deserving person for sure. But I do really feel bad for the people that are still, we're waiting for justice for their family members, or at least, a little more recognition for a court case.
Exactly. And as we have touched on in quite a few episodes now, he was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison in 2007. But that was after only being charged with the murders of 6 women. So he is linked to at least 26 women, and many of them, as we know, were Indigenous. Most of them were sex workers, but like we've said 85 times, that doesn't mean that they're any less valued, right? They have families, they have loved ones, and now the victims' families and their advocates say that his death makes it even more important to continue their fight for justice, just so that the women, just because he wasn't tried for them, basically there's a lot of forensic proof that he was responsible for the murders of these women as well.
And he himself, the remains of 33 DNA or remains of 33 women were found on his farm in Port Coquitlam. And he once bragged to an undercover officer that he had killed a total of 49 people.
He didn't make it to his mark of 50, which is disgusting. There's a lot of theories out there that, again, we've discussed, but, most of them, because he had such a low IQ, which you do see sometimes, but basically that makes people come to the conclusion that he was not doing this by himself. And there's been talks of this was a setup because people are saying that he was about to talk about his side of the story, which, I mean, after almost 20 something years, I highly doubt that now at the age of he was like 76 or something like that, he's going to start talking. I think if he was going to talk, he would have talked a long time ago. But, you know, people are saying like, oh, it has to do with politics and it was a setup because, you know, nobody wanted to hear him to tell his side of the story, which, again, whether he completed these murders by himself, he had other people. Again, with him dying, there is a lot of questions that will remain unanswered and a lot of justice that will remain unseen for
unfortunately.
These victims. Yeah. So we will keep you guys posted on anything that comes from that. I know in a couple episodes ago, we touched on some of the families fighting to keep the evidence because they were trying to destroy the evidence. And now, obviously, with him having this evidence destroyed or them trying to destroy it and now him being deceased, I mean, it's hopefully that we get to see the justice for these women. But I don't know unless someone else is, you know, genetically tied to the cases or something like that. But yeah, we will definitely keep you guys posted if there's any updates. Remember to check our Keeping Up with True Crime blog on murderwithmymotherpodcast.com for any updates on that. Another thing that we have been keeping our eye on is the missing people that have come up in the north. So northern British Columbia.
Dawson Creek area.
Yeah, there has been quite a few missing people from up there, and the BC coroner actually just confirmed that human remains identified as the missing woman Renee Didier. I'm probably saying that wrong, but I think it's Didier because it seems like a French name. So they have confirmed that the human remains found along the Kiskatinaw River have been positively identified as Renee Didier. The BC Coroner Service conducted an autopsy of the remains, and the coroner and police are not commenting on how she may have been killed. The remains were discovered on May 18th, west of Highway 97, by an industrial worker who was testing river water. She went missing on December 2nd, and footage taken from a security camera showed her at a gas station in the early morning hours of December 3rd. The images of Renee, who also sometimes went by the last name Supernat, were the last time she was seen before she went missing.
And she was 40 years old and one of 4 people to have gone missing from Dawson Creek in the last 15 months. Police are still searching for Darylyn Supernat,
who was her cousin.
Her
cousin.
First cousin, I think.
Which, that poor family.
And Cole Hosak and Dave Domingo. I mean, the area itself is vast, but it's a pretty small community, you know?
It is, and apparently there's a link to a certain bar, and a couple of people that had gone missing had been last seen at a certain local bar. So obviously detectives are working the cases, and we will keep our ear out for any updates on that. But if you have any information on this matter, you are asked to call the Dawson Creek RCMP at 250-784-3700 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. We'll definitely be doing a case on, because that whole area, like remember when we did Cody Lejabaga, whatever his fucking name was, episode, I don't remember what episode that was, but he was a serial killer that was working up in Prince George.
Yeah, one of the second youngest serial killer ever in the history of Canada.
Exactly. And then we have so many other people that have gone missing from that area. We have the Highway of Tears that has now been deemed that because there's been so many women and people that have gone missing from those areas. So something fishy's going on up there. And
I mean, I think the area is just so desolate. There's so much bush. There's so much opportunity for people to act on an impulse if they have a terrible impulse to do something to someone, to know that there's so many places to hide a body, so many places to mask their crimes. And, you know, the elements really take away from the evidence as a body's laying there.
Exactly. So hopefully they find something of value that they can use to apprehend, because I'm assuming she was murdered. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. She didn't leave herself by a river.
Exactly. But sometimes it's like so blatantly obvious and police are like, oh, she killed herself.
Well, especially in the case of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited people.
To go back to Picton, what was that? People were going missing for almost a decade and nobody was doing a fucking thing about it because they were basically looked at as disposable people, which is completely horrible. And especially when you're in law enforcement, you should not have that outlook about anything that is living, breathing, and is a human being,
Exactly.
So one thing, obviously, about true crime, right? It's like, for me, and I know for you, the psychological part of like why people do the things that they do really intrigues us. But another thing that really that I think is, to use a word that I think it's fucking cool, is all the cases that we've done. Most of them, if you look at them, DNA has had the biggest hand in solving and, linking murderers to their victims or identifying victims or things like that. And so the coolest thing is the relatively new advancement is it's referred to as IgG, which is investigative genetic genealogy. So for solving cold cases, genetic genealogy involves analyzing DNA evidence from crime scenes to identify potential suspects or victims. Investigators upload DNA profiles from the crime scene to genetic genealogy databases, where they search for matches with individuals who have submitted their DNA for genealogical purposes. So if you guys remember a couple episodes ago, I did the 23andMe.
Yep.
And was like, sorry if anyone in my family's murdered anybody, but not sorry. Because what they're doing is they're basically using, someone wants to just find out their family tree, Susan or whatever, is going to be like, oh, I'm going to just see what my family tree is. And then the police and different genealogical places are taking that DNA and running it through databases to see if it hits on any cold cases. So whether that be identifying a Jane Doe or a John Doe, or having this DNA in the system from a offender.
Well, and once you do any of those, I haven't done 23andMe, but I know you just did it. And was there any type of choice, or like if you wish to share that DNA, or is it just automatic that it gets uploaded?
So I think it's both. So I think they say that you kind of don't have a choice in their system if one day they do choose to partner up with something like that, but they also have one to tick, which I definitely did, because I probably have one or two criminals in my family where I'm like, you're going down.
Oh, 100%.
At least 5 or 6 probably. But no, it's kind of, I think, if you want to go down that road, it's very like you can choose yes, but then at the same time, just by submitting your DNA, it's in the system. So really, after you spit in this tube and you send it away,
you're pretty much like, here you go, here's a piece of me.
Exactly.
And it's crazy because investigators can build family trees and narrow down the possible identities, like leading to breakthroughs in cases that have remained unsolved for years. Mm-hmm. And it's been really instrumental in solving numerous high-profile cold cases. In the case we're covering today, IgG played a large role in catching the killer after almost 40 years.
Yeah, and that's why I think this technology is so advanced. Like, it's so crazy that in 2000 was the first time that they were actually able to take someone's DNA and create a profile with it. So before that, they could be like, oh, it's just type A, or it's just type A positive, or 0, or O, or whatever.
They would know, like...
And then you don't know, because look at how many people are wrongfully convicted, and it was based on, taking, my favorite is taking hairs and just looking to see if they're similar.
This hair looks like the hair of someone that killed someone. Yeah. It looks exactly like this person's
And then it's like a dog hair after this person's done like 20 years in jail, So the fact that this narrows down so specifically to the point of like, if I give my DNA and my third cousin on my father's side had committed a rape and murder, they can literally detail it down to, okay, the person, aka me, who has submitted the DNA is now, we can do the degrees of separation to see where, and then they would see, okay, how many third cousins does this person have and who lived in this area at this time, and then they can test against that person. So I just think it's super helpful in solving all these cases, and we're seeing more and more cases being solved with the use of genealogical.
The first one I remember
DNA.
was the Golden State Killer.
Yes, exactly.
Like that was one that just came out of nowhere. He wasn't even on anyone's radar.
Mm-hmm. And that was the big first one. And then there's also the horrible murder of Christine Jessup in Toronto, right? That was the one that they first used in Canada. And this is all relatively new. So in the span of 20 years, we've gone from being able to say, okay, we have a profile, to now we know exactly who and where this person was and who they're related to and how they are related to them.
The coolest thing is the people like way back that had the foresight to save the stuff. To save the samples.
Thank God. Because a lot of the people, you do hear of those cases where it's like, oh, all the evidence was lost. All the evidence was destroyed. But if they were able to save even the smallest, even epithelial DNA. So
that's
DNA.
Crazy. Like touch DNA, that trips me out.
It does, because it's literally, you can shake someone's hand. I was just listening to a case, obviously, that's all I do, is listening to a case where someone was trying to get DNA from someone they knew was a killer and shook their hand and then put their own hand in a bag and brought it to the lab, because just shaking that person's hand, now they had their DNA.
Mine would
watch
just
what
be
you
all
touch.
Dog hair DNA.
Yeah. Mom doesn't have a lot of DNA left from just having so much dog hair around her. And now her husband also has a hairy shedding dog, so it's white and black.
I found my dog hair soulmate.
She really did. So, but to jump into this episode, I think that's a good segue because, well, not about dog hair, but the genealogical
dog hair
DNA.
Killer.
Yes. So with that, we will hop right into today's episode.
It was 1983 in Yorkville, a fashionable and normally safe suburb of Toronto. Just a few days before Christmas, on December 20th, 22-year-old Erin Gilmour and her boyfriend, Anthony Monk, had plans for dinner. When Anthony arrived, the door to Erin's apartment was open, and at first steps into her normally well-kept apartment, he could tell something was wrong. As he continued to call for her, he entered her bedroom, where he spotted her duvet spread out on the bed. When he pulled back the duvet, he found Erin. She'd been bound and gagged and stabbed multiple times all over her body. She had a black item around her neck, and it was clear that she was also sexually assaulted.
He went downstairs and called police. Although DNA analysis was still years away, investigators were smart enough to collect all forensic evidence at the scene, hoping one day it would help them catch this brutal killer. At this time, they did a lot of blood grouping, which could help narrow down suspects if they had someone to compare it to, but really no, because how many people have certain blood types? So it wasn't anything super concrete. So at the time of the murder, this collection would prove to be helpful in the future. Erin Gilmour came from a large, influential, and well-known Toronto family. Erin lived a life of affluence coming from a prominent family, but it's said by everyone who knew her that she was kind, down-to-earth, caring to everyone that she met, and that she lit up a room when she walked into it. She always had a smile on her face. Her parents had divorced when she was young, and her mother had remarried. She had 2 boys, and Erin loved being a big sister to them, and they absolutely adored Erin. She had graduated university and done some traveling. She went to Australia and had just recently returned. So her dad rented her a cute little apartment above Robin's Knits, which is a clothing store where she was working part-time.
Like, how awesome would that be?
Mm-hmm. And she was wanting to be a fashion designer. Yeah. So it's like, working at a clothing store, having your cute little apartment right above work. Like, if you're late, you could just roll right in there.
And if you look at pictures, it was such a cute apartment. Like, it was like a little coach house above the store in, a great area. And I just think, like, you're in your prime. You're so great.
Yeah.
Until it wasn't.
Exactly. Well, that's why, right? Live every day. Like, today's the only day you have. So, a little Murder with My Mother inspirational quote. Her dad, David, was a businessman and mining tycoon, and he was actually the inventor of Fiji water, which if you ever bought a bottle of Fiji water, that guy's rich as fuck because that bottle is like $7.
That's what I thought. As soon as I saw the Fiji water, I was like,
that explains it.
Guy must have a lot of money.
Yes. And her mother, Anna, was a businesswoman that owned a ballet studio. And when she was younger, she actually used to be a model. And I know Erin dove into the world of modeling for a little bit because she was beautiful. She was absolutely beautiful, inside and out, by the sounds of it. The night before her murder, Erin had her 2 little brothers over for a sleepover at her apartment. It was said that she was in good spirits and she was excited for the Christmas festivities to come. Police found no evidence of forced entry and nothing was taken, so right away that ruled out robbery. Investigators determined that by walking on the rooftops, access was granted through her sliding door, or her door that, either a window door that was not, the front door.
Well, and I think like back then it was, it was a lot less. I mean, I didn't ever lock anything.
Until
a lot of people did.
Even now.
Well, yeah, even now I
So
don't.
if you guys know where Mom lives, I just hop over to her house.
And over 800 people turned up to pay respects to Erin, and the community mourned the senseless loss of a promising young woman. Police were also at the funeral monitoring the mourners and taking photos of people as they came and went, which we all know a lot of the time a killer will show up to any kind of a afterlife celebration.
Well, they love
funeral.
to interject themselves into the case, right? Just to be close to it,
and
to
that
kind of keep tabs.
That still grabs me, like how twisted that is.
Yeah, no, it's super weird. But even what grabs me is people who say that they did a murder and they never even had anything to do with it. I think we covered that.
Yeah, that's
remember,
also really
like
super
when, I don't get that. But
so, as in any normal investigation, her boyfriend was the first person police looked at. And a big red flag was when he first called the police, he had said that he thought she had committed suicide.
Which there was blood all over the apartment, and I highly doubt. Obviously, he probably was in shock. He probably wasn't thinking.
Yeah, he was probably so confused by the whole thing.
Exactly.
So that to the police was like, yeah, well, clearly she didn't commit suicide. Mm-hmm. She's been, gagged and raped, bound stabbed, and raped.
Yes, exactly.
So that was weird to the
police. But again, I'm sure because he went downstairs and called police. Like he didn't have a cell phone. It was 1983, so he had to probably find a phone or I don't know if they had car phones by that time.
Well, but there's probably a payphone on every corner.
Exactly. So
their fathers had been business partners and they had grown up together before they even became an item. So they had a lot of history.
Yeah, they had grown up together.
Yeah. So they investigated Anthony and they did some surveillance. As it was 1983, technological tools were few and far between. But he had stopped at an ATM on his way to Erin's, which by using a time-stamped receipt of his transaction, he was eliminated from the suspect list.
See, investigators today are like so spoiled because they can literally be like, okay, let's look at their cell phone records. Let's look at their social media. Let's look at their emails. Let's look at what they Googled. Let's look at
the built-in chip in their brain, pretty much.
Basically, right? So after clearing him, police had a very large pool of suspects, almost everyone in the Toronto area. They looked into everything from business dealings that her father had been involved in to her lavish 21st birthday party guest list just the year before. And just weeks before Erin's murder, she had actually thrown a party at her apartment that got out of control, which tends to happen when you have a party. I mean, people hear about
quite
it.
Out of control.
Yes, they had like spilled wine all over her nice things, and she kept her apartment really cute and clean, and that's why Anthony knew as soon as he walked in, like, something's wrong. And also, I mean, when you have a party and half the people there you don't know and they're not taking care of your stuff, they're not, they don't have that same care and attention that you would. And it looked like quite a small little place, so I don't know how many people, you can fit a lot of people into a small space.
Well, you can, because Danica had parties all the time.
They know. So dozens of detectives worked the case and interviewed over 700 people. They interviewed every sexual offender known in the area and still came up with nothing promising.
No blood type B.
No. Years passed and the killer remained elusive, but 17 years later, thanks to DNA advancements, detectives had their first real break. By 2000, police had developed a DNA profile of Erin's killer, but when they ran that profile, to their surprise, there was another cold case that the DNA had linked these two murders.
So they knew that person had killed at least two people.
Susan Tice was found 4 months before Erin and just 4 kilometers away. Police knew that the same person that killed Erin had also killed Susan. And although the crimes had a lot in common, the victims did not.
Yeah, Susan Tice was a 45-year-old mother of 4. She had 3 sons and a daughter. Sue Willis,
that's her maiden name.
Sue Williscroft, her maiden name, began at McMaster University in 1956 and became a social worker and a family therapist. She married Fred Tice in Owen Sound in 1961, but they were recently divorced when Susan moved to Toronto from Calgary months before she was killed. Although she did not come from an affluent family, she decided when her kids were old enough that she would return to school. She juggled the mom title, wife, student, and had attained 2 master's degrees. At the time of her death, she was working as a social worker. And I saw an interview with her daughter, and she was very outdoorsy and very capable, independent, strong woman, especially for those times, the times that she grew up in.
Yeah.
So,
well, you see every picture of her, she's like canoeing. Yeah. And I watched an interview doing the research of her son recalling one of his fondest memories with her. And yeah, it's like everything they would talk about. She's outside, she's doing this, she's, to do all those things. Because trust me, I've been a single mom. I have worked and went to school at the same time. And just balancing those 3 things alone with 1 kid is hard enough. Yeah. So with 4 kids, I couldn't even and to be getting your master's degree and, still have time to go on a fucking hike.
And she was
barely brush my hair.
She was also super connected to her kids. When you hear them talk about her, she was very, very connected to them, which is that also takes so much time and energy to make, such a strong connection with your children.
In the summer of 1983, when she didn't show up for a family dinner, her brother-in-law went to check on her. Her front door was locked, but as he approached the back door, he saw that it was open. Music was playing softly as he called for Susan. Susan was found laying in her room, stabbed to death, and was covered by a blanket.
So exactly
familiar.
The same.
Yeah. Her neighbor said that she had heard a scream at about 1:30 the following morning. Her and her husband had just separated and were in the middle of a divorce, so naturally he became the top suspect. Investigators did all they could, but concluded that Mr. Tice was not responsible for Susan's death. Investigators at the time did believe that Susan's and Erin's murders were connected, but they had no way to be sure until the results of the DNA comparison came back in 2000.
Yeah, so that's a long time away.
Well, at least now they knew that this person had to be in the Toronto area for at least 4 months or had gone and came back or whatever, because they were only 4 months apart and they were only 4 kilometers away from each other. So for years, though, the cases remained cold. So there was a standstill for 5 more years. So in 2015, more than 30 years later, a cold case detective took over the case and deemed the investigation as Project Never Give Up.
Which I just want to say is awesome, because look how much stuff is given up,
Yeah, well, people lose, especially I think that investigators that have always worked in these kinds of investigations, you get used to the tools that you have and and maybe probably discouraged because you have this 30 years. What are you you're probably thinking about it all the time. And there was over 40 boxes of case files and nothing that brought them closer to finding the killer in all of these years. So they appealed to the public for leads. They offered rewards. I think at one point it was $50,000. I think I read something about $500,000. Well, one of the families had a lot of money. So now, for Erin's family to bring a reward forward, and for Susan's family, we know money talks, right?
Yep. And they looked into every avenue. They even got down to the fact that Susan had used a carpet cleaning service, and so did Erin. After her party, she had to rent a carpet cleaner, and so then they were like, yes, this is it. Mm-hmm. This is the only thing linking these 2 women. Yeah. But it turned out to be nothing. It wasn't. There was nothing in common. They did have a guy that they thought at first was the guy.
Mm-hmm. He worked there for like the whole time. He worked there. He's like, oh, I remember cleaning that house and da-da-da-da-da. So yeah, they ran the DNA. Now that they had this profile, it was really good for comparing, right? So they can, if they had a suspect, they compared instead of the whole like, oh, A positive or O positive, whatever. Yeah. It was more precise, but nothing. All of these people were tested and absolutely nobody hit the DNA profile.
Hundreds of people.
Yeah. So DNA collected from hundreds of people leading to no matches. How discouraging do you think that was? So in 2018, like Mom touched on in the beginning of the episode, California used IgG to find the prolific and elusive Golden State Killer. And although there wasn't a whole lot of DNA left from Erin and Susan's cases because they had done some testing with it. And it's so important to preserve as much of the DNA as possible because of reasons like this, right?
And I think probably when they first started, they were just like, they were probably a lot more willy-nilly about it. Like, oh, let's just use it. Let's use all this DNA. Let's use it all.
Because there's no way to foresee something like this happening, right? Obviously, when you're even for them, like, to keep the DNA from like murders that happened in like the 50s and the 60s. Like that is so amazing that these people keep that stuff.
It's and like they had a time machine.
Collect it. Exactly. Like even you hear about people like investigators collecting cigarette butts from the area and not even thinking like, it probably has nothing to do with it. And then all of a sudden the cigarette butt, they realized 30 years later, the cigarette butt and the sexual fluids that they had left behind at the scene match. So now we have two things of DNA to use instead of, just a one sample. So although the profiles that came from this technology were very comprehensive, in 2020, detectives used this to solve the cold case murder of Christine Jessup, like how we had discussed earlier. And Erin's brother, Sean, who was 13 at the time of her murder, obviously that's very traumatic. He had a sleepover with her the night before. You could tell, he said in an interview, like, she was my confidant. I talked to her because they were like almost only 8 years apart.
Yeah.
8-9 years apart.
And I think she was like she was really connected. She was a really vivacious listener.
Yeah. And for a kid, like there's nothing that you remember and you connect more to than like a safe adult, someone who she wasn't too old, but she wasn't too young. So she had that insight of to like, he said, oh, I hated school. And, she really walked him through it and made him feel a lot better. So he was watching TV and had seen that they had solved Christine Jessup's murder that went unsolved for many, many years as well. And he called detectives to inquire about this new technology. But they were already one step ahead of her brother, and they had already started working with a genetic genealogist to find her killer. The component of the DNA came back with slight European descent, but mostly Americas, which indicated an indigenous background. And not a lot of people in these rural communities give DNA to databases. And I don't fucking blame them because they don't trust a fucking thing that the government or anyone's doing, because look at what our government and other people, churches, whatever, have done to these people, right? So I don't blame them for not,
having the mistrust.
Exactly. So due to the homogeneous gene pools, which means that people are related many times over, basically, there wasn't enough people. So they started, having connections with people that were related to them.
And I think that's so common in so many indigenous communities around the world. I mean, you have your different communities in different places, but eventually there's only so many people and it circles back around.
Well, you always hear where people are like, oh, I married this person and then I found out she was my cousin, and it's like, oh my God.
And imagine if you didn't have any way to trace that. I mean, all you had was the word of your ancestors.
Yeah. So it was really hard to initially link this to one specific family because of all of the overlay, basically, right?
Yeah.
Overlay. So when analyzing, they could tell that the murderer was from the James Bay homogeneous gene pool. So they narrowed it down to 100 families through the genealogical research. Investigators started sending kits and had some help from the indigenous genealogists in James Bay. With that, they narrowed it down to 26 families, which still a lot, but it's better than a needle in a haystack, right? Before they're starting with like, okay, we have all these people, 100 families. Now it's narrowed down to 26. Genealogists, that was a hard one for me, do not have access to the files from the case. So by the process of elimination, they got down to one family without any help or leads from investigators.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. So cool, because it's like, kind of like, okay, we have this stuff. We're not going to show it to you, but we want to see what you're going to come up with. And then, most of the time they actually say that cold cases, the name is in the box. They say it's either someone we interviewed one time. It's either someone who was the neighbor. It was someone who found them. It was, usually people are connected. But in this case, it was getting them nowhere.
Yeah, it didn't come from anywhere that they previously had suspected.
No.
So almost 40 years later, DNA analysis was able to specifically narrow it down to 5 brothers with the same last name, and that name was Sutherland. Investigators were cautious with questioning the brothers as they didn't want any forewarning for whichever brother was their suspect.
Because they're going to just be like, hey, I just got someone came to my house, call. Yeah. And I mean, depending on obviously how the relationships were between the brothers, but they basically went into it assuming that they were still in contact.
They zeroed in on the brothers. In all 40 boxes, there was no mention of the brothers, so there was nothing tying them back. All the brothers were living in the Toronto areas in the early 80s, so all 5 of them.
So it's like, oh, that's really helpful.
But they all lived very different lives. Some of them were upstanding citizens, and some of them were already familiar with the criminal justice system. Investigators did their due diligence in narrowing down which brother could be their guy. They started with the most likely brother. He happened to be a registered sex offender, but he was deceased by the time that the murders happened.
No, by the
time they started investigating. He was excluded. That means he was
already in the system.
Yeah, so he already was in the system and he didn't match. Another brother was murdered when he was slashed with a broken bottle, and his DNA was also on file, so that ruled him out. The rest of the 3 brothers all had lived in Northern Ontario by this time, so investigators took a trip up north.
One of the brothers worked in a mine and lived about 8 hours north of Toronto. They tailed him to try to see if he would throw anything away with his DNA on it. Luckily, they collected 2 pop cans and a COVID mask. Oh, God, the amount of breath you breathe into those COVID masks are like a treasure trove of DNA, I'm sure.
Disgusting.
Right? They sent them in for testing, and 5 months later, this brother was also ruled out. The last 2 brothers lived in very remote towns. One had a history of violence. He lived in a tiny First Nations town with a population of 1,200. The other brother's record was absolutely squeaky clean. Like, this guy didn't even have a parking ticket. They honed in on the first brother, who also happened to be a witness to another crime one of the investigators had been working on. They brought him in to discuss this other case. While there, he drank some water and left the cup behind. Investigators sent this in for testing, and it turned out that he also was not the suspect they were looking for.
Dun-dun-dun.
But that left only one more person, the squeaky clean brother named Joseph George Sutherland. George Sutherland, as he went by George, lived in the small rural town of Moosonee, about 850 kilometers north of Toronto. Train and plane are the only ways in and out of Moosonee. So you know that people who live there know who's there, why they're there, who they are, who they're sleeping with, what kind of toothpaste they use. Like, they know everything about everybody because it's just a small, close-knit town. So being such a small town, they had to move really specifically because everyone knew when an outsider was there. 60-year-old George Sutherland was the most unlikely brother, but DNA was sending them right in his direction. He was a divorced father, said to be friendly, and worked in IT and family services. He was said to be quiet, and everyone who knew him said he was an upstanding citizen. When he was 21 in 1983 is when he lived in Toronto. The detectives went with 2 armed local officers and headed over to George Sutherland's house. George was very unsuspecting. He invited the investigators inside, and they described him as polite and quiet. They explained that they had a DNA warrant and that they would be escorting him to the nearest detachment for testing. He was said to be very stoic. One of George's best friends, Randy Coda, was one of the few police up in Moosonee. Now retired, George and him would often hunt, fish, and trap together, and they were very close for over 10 years. And it's funny because I was reading, and I guess Randy, who is one of his best friends, actually ran his name. Once he became close with him, he like ran his name just like how we do. We're like, oh, we're going to go meet this person. Let's like see if they have a criminal record. And it came back absolutely clean, not like nothing. There's not anything on his criminal record. So of course, after that, they formed a fast friendship. He was said to be super friendly. They had the same interests. They were always hanging out together.
Imagine.
Imagínate, imagine that. They took his blood and he remained quiet when they instructed him to obtain a lawyer if he wished. He had no questions for police and they had no cause to hold him as they waited for the DNA results. They left on November 23rd.
On November 24th, George texted his friend Randy that he needed him over at his place. He sent him another text, so
Randy
2 texts like bang, bang.
With a guy who barely said 2 words.
Yeah. So Randy, being curious about the out-of-character urgency he sensed in George's text, went over to George's house. Randy went inside and George and him sat down. George said, "I've done some things I'm not very proud of. I did some B&Bs in Toronto 40 years ago."
B&Es.
Oh, B&Es. B&Bs. He explained that Toronto police came and took DNA from him.
But Randy, being a police officer for like most of his life, knew that B&Es, so break and enters, don't have Toronto investigators coming back 40 years later for DNA, especially somewhere so far. Like, they're not going to come almost 1,000 kilometers. Exactly, because you did a B&E in the 80s. He said he was in a home stealing jewelry to pawn it. A woman interrupted him, and he held her at knife point and raped and stabbed her, which we know was Susan Tice.
Yeah.
As Randy looked at George in shock, George said, "It gets worse," which Randy was like, How
could it get any worse?
He said, 4 months later, the same thing happened, and I raped her and stabbed her to death too because she saw my face. Which I don't know if Susan saw his face, but I have a feeling that if you were just there to do a B&E, because sometimes, we'll get half-truths, right? I think
I think it's too hard for the person that did it to even be able to admit it to themselves.
Well, because you have to look too, like in my own experience, of course, not anything to compare, but when I was 20 to when I was 25, I was a completely different person. 25 to 30, completely different person. So I think that the way that these people who perpetrate these murders, they almost disconnect from them once they become, because I don't think you go into a house looking to steal something and you're interrupted. If I was interrupted and I'm in there trying to steal something, I'm fucking running away.
Yeah.
Or maybe punch him in the face and run away. Or take
rape
the shit.
Wouldn't be the thing that came to
and
my
then
mind.
Stabbing and binding these people,
Yeah.
that's not what you're going to do. So Randy left just shocked because how could someone he spent so much time with and he considered him one of his best friends, how could he be responsible for such a violent and heinous crime and Randy have absolutely no idea? Randy called his old boss at the OPP. Investigators were notified that he had confessed, so worried that George would do something to himself, they went up to Moosonee the next day. Because if you just said that to somebody, obviously you're probably going to kill yourself.
Run away.
Kill your child that you're living with. Who knows? They don't know what he's capable of because, yes, now he's 60 years old.
They do know what he's capable of.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Now, okay, he's older. He's calm. He's remained, off the radar, but they do know what he's capable of doing. So Randy told police that they didn't need any helicopters or tactical teams, and he believed that he could sway George to just turn himself in. So Randy went back to George's. They sat and they talked, and Randy let George know that it was time for him to do the right thing. He had been free for 40 years and living his life and just, continued on, and the victims' families needed this closure.
Randy walked George Sutherland to the end of the driveway and waved down the cruiser, and they took him away. 40 years later, they finally had their guy, and they could let Susan and Erin's families know. Joseph George Sutherland, now age 61, was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He pled guilty to 2 counts of second, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life. Once in custody, he never talked to the police, and the mystery of how and why he chose his victims, and if there are any more victims, remains unknown.
So that's the thing, because like we said, if you are going to admit to something and you're just going to give half truths, you always see that in cases where, okay, they have evidence for these 2. But what if there was someone who he did that to and didn't report it? He raped them, didn't report it. You never see people escalate just to rape, murder like that. Usually there's
precursors.
Yes, there's, peeping Toms, and then they kind of
rapists.
Then they're voyeurs, and then they go on to commit rape, and then they go on to once you sexually link rape and murder and all that stuff, you're probably going to do it multiple times. And so again,
that's what gets you off.
Exactly. So because of the sexual aspects of this case, I really don't think that these are the only 2 people. I hope that they are, because that's just, they don't have any other cases that have come up. But I'm hoping that it was just those 2. But he also lived in Toronto, and where did he go in the years after that? Did he go right up to Moosonee? I don't know, because if you look, he had lived there for 10 years, but where was he for those 30 years in between? And again, once you get that you have that lust for that, that urge to do those things, nobody wakes up and just is like, I'm just going to go commit a rape and murder. So
maybe he was at the Highway of Tears.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But hopefully, but that's the thing too with that, is because a lot of those people are just missing. Right? Because you can, like we discussed in the beginning of the episode, the desolate area, it's easy for the elements to kind of assist a killer in covering up a lot of the evidence.
Especially hunters.
Yeah. Hunters. Hunters. Oh. But yeah, that was episode 55. So.
And I don't know if you noticed, but we're just doing no video today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're so exciting for you guys is hopefully you guys are all excited, but we are actually going to start bringing you guys, and I know I've said this like 55 times. No one believes me because I'm just gaslighting the shit out of all of you. No, we are going to start bringing you guys episodes every 2 weeks. So you'll get 1 audio and 1 video every month. So hopefully you guys are not sick of our voices and our faces, because you'll still see and hear both. Might even hear our faces. But yeah, so that was episode 55. Super amazing that they're able to take all of this stuff and cases that they kind of lost hope and are able to really, like I always say, everything done in the dark always comes to light. And now I bet so many fucking people that have committed these crimes.
Oh, they're shitting bricks.
Oh my God. Because it's like, imagine being at like my family event and like you're my uncle or something that had committed a crime, and I'm like, yeah, I did 23andMe and da-da-da-da-da. Like, what are you going to be like? Oh, fuck. You're going to be just waiting and waiting like, oh no. But serves you right, because shouldn't rape, shouldn't murder, shouldn't do any of those things. So, and they'll get you even if you touched the door handle.
Even if you shook a hand.
Even if you just blew your spit in the direction. Like literally, even if you talked too aggressively. Dan, if you ever need to use my DNA, it will be all over this microphone. So, but yeah, I think that's super cool that they are coming for you. They're coming for all these people who have just, they're like, oh, I'm free, I'm fine, I'm good. But it's like, no.
Nuh-uh, motherfucker.
No, serves you right. So, yeah, but another thing, we got an email from someone named Cheryl. So Cheryl has binged all of our episodes.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hey, Cheryl. This is a shout out. Hopefully you made it through all the way through the episode so you could hear your shout out. She's probably like, fuck these girls. They didn't even talk about me in the first 5 minutes. Well, here you are. You get the last 5 minutes. But we really love when we hear from you guys. We love, she had a really good suggestion, kind of diving more into the Picton case. Just a lot of mystery behind that, right? So there's a lot of unanswered questions. And she actually recommended a book, The Picton Files, I believe, and to kind of dive into that, which is funny that she had emailed us at that time, because I think I was just saying that to you the other day about getting that book and reading that. And I think she had mentioned that having that author on as a guest would be super cool, which I agree with, but you can't find anything about her book anywhere. So it's like no one has interviewed her. Nobody has talked to her. So
let's make it our mission.
Let's do it. And we've just been getting a lot of cool messages. We love hearing from you guys. So
the support is really nice.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, rate us on your favorite podcast platform, leave a comment. Unless your comment's like, this fucking sucks, and like the first 5 episodes of this shit. We've told you guys, we started this in a closet.
The first 5 episodes, well, number 5 is one of my favorite ones actually, but the sound on the first 4 is
shit, because we were literally in a closet. So
it got better in the closet. We had a big podcast room.
Yes, it was too big, no insulation, and I don't know shit about fuck, so especially when it comes to technology. So yeah, it was just like, hey, Mom, want to do a podcast? And then, yeah, sure, our podcast sounds like fucking ass. And here we are, episode 55 in a full studio. And another shout out to Speakeasy Podcast Studio. Dan, you are great. Dan, what's the website? Speakeasypodcast.ca. So if you guys want to podcast and we've, really made you guys, want to check out the podcast world, Dan is super helpful. He'll walk you through everything. Even if you need a teleprompter, Dan's got you covered, because I came to him a couple weeks ago, mad at my boyfriend for making me do these videos. And
these videos.
Not these ones. These ones are great. This is something totally unrelated. But yeah, Dan talked me down. And I'm still with my boyfriend, even though I don't think that he was thinking it was going to be like that when I went home. But it went smoothly. And Dan's super helpful, super great, beautiful studio, and lots of nice things to say about Dan. So good job.
Excellent.
Yeah, so rate us, tell your friends, that word of mouth is like the biggest thing for podcasts. So yeah, follow us on our socials, on our, other than TikTok, because I don't post anything on there, but because I've got too much. I'm too old, guys. I'm 32 now. 32. So it's just going to get worse from here. It's all downhill from here, I think.
Hey.
Especially when I'm talking about technology. And think about it. Think about the last time you felt like up and with it.
Yesterday.
Okay. There you go. Not today. So that was a trick question. But yes, so yeah, we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Well, you'll see us in 2 weeks, but for this one, you just had to settle with our beautiful voices.
Thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you guys. So with that was episode 55 of Murder with My Mother, the true crime podcast where I talk murder with my married mother. Woo! Bye, guys.
Bye.
Hopefully you're still married for the next episode.
Imagine. And
mom's divorced. Mom's dead.
Mom's annulled the marriage.
Love you guys.